The heat of late summer clung to the small Texas town like an old leather jacket, heavy and unwilling to be shed. I'd been back at my father's ranch for 2 months, caught between finishing school and figuring out what to do with my life. The ranch felt timeless, a place where men carried themselves with the same rugged pride as the cattle they herded. Among them was my father's oldest friend, Clay Maddox, a cowboy carved out of dust and sweat, the kind of man who looked like he'd never once doubted who he was. Clay was around my father's age, broad-shouldered with hands roughened by rope and weather. He had a way of leaning against a fence post that made it look as though the world itself might fall, but he would not. I'd grown up knowing him as the man who showed up at every cookout, who traded hunting stories with Dad, who always smelled faintly of tobacco and saddle soap. To me, he was simply Uncle Clay, though there was no blood between us. Still, now that I was older, I couldn't ignore the subtle pull in my gut whenever he laughed or clapped me on the back. It wasn't something I admitted, not to my father, not even to myself most days. In a town where men spat on the ground at the mention of anything other than women and rodeos, I kept my desires locked away. Late one evening, I sat in my room with the curtains drawn, phone glowing in my hand. The picture had been meant for someone else, a boy I'd met online, another restless soul searching for connection where this town had none to offer. I'd hesitated before hitting send, but desire outpaced reason. The sharp buzz of relief hit me when the screen confirmed the message had gone through. Only seconds later, dread replaced it. My thumb trembled as I reread the sent to line. Somehow, some twisted betrayal of muscle memory, I had sent the photo not to the boy hundreds of miles away, but to Clay Maddox, my father's best friend. The blood drained from my face. I dropped the phone onto the bed like it had burned me. My thoughts tangled, colliding between horror and disbelief. Delete it. Undo it. Something. But the truth glared back. There was no undoing what had just happened. Minutes crawled by, each heavier than the last. My phone stayed silent, no reply, no hint of acknowledgement. Maybe he hadn't opened it. Maybe I could hope he'd never check his messages. But Clay was a man of habits, and he checked everything: his truck's oil, his horse's hooves, his phone. I paced my small room, cursing under my breath. The humiliation pressed into my chest like a branding iron. My father would disown me. Clay would despise me. I'd never survive the shame if he showed the picture to anyone. The phone finally buzzed. My stomach dropped as I snatched it up. One new message. From Clay. My thumb hovered above the screen, every nerve screaming not to look, and yet unable to resist. "You sure this was meant for me, boy?" The word stared back, not scolding, not cruel. Just a simple question, laced with something I couldn't quite name. Teasing? Curious? My breath caught. 100 replies spun through my mind, apologies, denials, frantic explanations. But none seemed strong enough to stitch up the wound I'd just torn open. I sank onto the edge of the bed, heart hammering, heat rising to my ears. For a moment, I considered throwing the phone out the window, pretending none of this had ever happened. Yet, beneath the storm of panic, another current ran, a low thrum of something I hated myself for recognizing. It was excitement. Sleep abandoned me that night. Every time I closed my eyes, Clay's message glowed behind my eyelids like an ember refusing to die out. "You sure this was meant for me, boy?" The words had no judgment in them. No anger, just a quiet amusement that unsettled me more than fury ever could. The following morning, I tried to act normal, joining my father at the breakfast table while he read the paper and sipped his black coffee. My hands shook when I reached for the butter knife, and I kept waiting for him to slam the paper down and demand to know why his best friend had received such a picture. But Dad was oblivious, too preoccupied with cattle prices and the weather forecast. Clay arrived not long after, stepping into the kitchen with the easy authority of someone who belonged there. His boots thudded against the wooden floor, his hat tilted low, his smile steady as ever. My heart leapt into my throat. I couldn't look at him without remembering the mistake, the picture, the message. "Morning, Jack." He greeted me casually, his voice a low rumble. "Sleep well?" The words were innocent, but his eyes lingered on mine a fraction too long, as though he already knew the answer. He crawled up my neck. I muttered something about chores and excused myself before I collapsed under the weight of it. That became the rhythm of the next few days, Clay showing up, his gaze cutting across rooms and gatherings, subtle but sharp enough to slice through my defenses. He never mentioned the picture again, not directly, but his presence became charged, like the static before a storm. When he spoke to me, there was a warmth beneath his words, a suggestion I didn't know how to resist. At the barbecue that Saturday, the tension reached its peak. The backyard filled with the familiar chaos of neighbors, laughter, and the scent of sizzling meat. Dad busied himself with the grill, beer in hand, while Clay drifted through the crowd, his shirt sleeves rolled up, revealing sun-browned forearms that made my stomach twist with nerves. I tried to avoid him, sticking close to the drink's cooler, but it was useless. Eventually he found me. "You've been quiet lately," he said, voice low enough that only I could hear. His eyes flicked down briefly, as though reminding me of the secret we shared. "I've been busy," I replied, though the words sounded hollow. Clay leaned closer, the faint smell of tobacco curling off his shirt. "Busy thinking, maybe." The air between us thickened. I could feel the sweat gathering at the back of my neck, though the evening was cool. Before I could answer, Dad called Clay over to help with the grill, breaking the spell. Clay winked at me before walking away, leaving me trembling with a mix of fear and something darker, heavier. That night, when most of the guests had left and the fire pit burned low, I lingered near the barn, needing space to breathe. The cicadas sang their endless chorus, the stars sprawling wide overhead. I thought I was alone until I heard boots crunch against gravel. Clay emerged from the shadows, hat tilted back, his expression unreadable. "You hiding out here, Jack?" I swallowed hard. Just needed some air. He stepped closer, his silhouette broad against the starlight. "You know," he said slowly, "a man doesn't send a picture like that to another man by accident. Not unless he wants something." My mouth went dry. It was an accident, I insisted, though the conviction faltered even as I said it. Clay studied me, his eyes narrowing, his voice dipping lower. "Then, why haven't you told me to delete it? Why haven't you told me to forget it ever happened?" I couldn't answer. My silence betrayed me. Clay moved in until he was close enough that I felt the heat of his body, the brim of his hat casting a shadow over both our faces. His voice was a whisper now, meant only for me. "Because you wanted me to see it." My breath caught. The truth I had tried to bury surfaced, undeniable. And as he stood there, waiting, I realized the ground beneath me had shifted. Whatever happened next, there was no turning back. The barn had never felt so suffocating. The smell of hay, leather, and old wood wrapped around me as I tried to steady my breathing. Clay's words, "because you wanted me to see it," echoed inside my chest, daring me to admit what I had denied for so long. For a moment, neither of us moved. The night stretched taut, like a rope about to snap. I could have run, could have thrown some stammered denial into the darkness, and fled back to the house. But my legs rooted to the spot, my heart hammering against the ribs that kept me from giving myself away. Clay took a slow step closer, the gravel crunching beneath his boot. "You don't have to be afraid, Jack," he said, his tone low but steady. "I ain't gonna hurt you." The gentleness in his voice startled me more than any threat would have. It was a softness I hadn't expected from him, a man whose life was measured in scars and sunburns. "I shouldn't have sent it," I whispered, my throat tight. "It was a mistake. Maybe—" Clay allowed, his gaze fixed on me. "But mistakes don't keep a man awake at night. Mistakes don't make him look at me the way you're looking now." His words stripped me bare, more than the photo ever had. My cheeks burned, and I turned my head, ashamed of the truth in his observation. Silence pulsed between us until Clay moved again, bridging the last of the distance. His hand brushed mine, so light, so deliberate that my breath caught in my chest. Every nerve lit up, a warning and a promise in equal measure. "You ever been with a man before?" he asked softly. The question knocked the air out of me. I shook my head, unable to lie, unable to pretend that the heat between us was anything other than new and terrifying. Clay's eyes softened. Then I reckon you've been carrying a heavy weight. My lips parted to protest, but no words came. He wasn't wrong. I had carried it, hidden it, buried it beneath layers of silence and fear. And here was Clay, pulling it to the surface with nothing more than a look and a touch. The barn door creaked in the breeze, reminding me how exposed we were. At any moment, my father could come searching. The thought should have jolted me back into caution, but instead it only heightened the charge between us. Danger had a flavor I hadn't tasted before, and it was intoxicating. Clay tilted his head, studying me like a man studies the horizon before deciding whether to ride. I ain't asking for more than you're ready to give, but I need you to be honest with yourself, Jack. You want me? The question landed like a thunderclap. My chest heaved, the truth clawing its way out of me. Yes, I breathed, the word trembling but undeniable. His jaw tightened, as though that single confession carried more weight than any oath. Slowly, deliberately, Clay raised a hand and cupped the side of my face. His palm was rough, his touch careful. I leaned into it without meaning to, drawn by gravity I couldn't fight. And then his lips brushed mine. It wasn't a kiss at first, not really, just the ghost of one, a test. But when I didn't pull away, when my body leaned forward with a hunger I couldn't control, he pressed harder. His mouth was warm, insistent, carrying the taste of smoke and beer and something wholly his. The kiss unraveled me. My hands clutched at his shirt, desperate and clumsy, as if holding on could anchor me in the storm he had unleashed. For a few seconds, the world outside the barn didn't exist. No father, no town, no shame. Just the fire that sparked where our mouths met. A sudden crack of wood from the porch snapped us apart. We froze, breath ragged, listening. My father's voice drifted faintly through the night, calling for Clay. Clay's hand lingered against my cheek for one final heartbeat before he stepped back, his voice a whisper sharp with urgency. Not a word, Jack. Not yet. Then he was gone, boots fading into the dark, leaving me alone with lips still burning, heart pounding, and a truth I could never unlearn. The kiss in the barn haunted me. For days afterward, I replayed it in my mind, the weight of Clay's hand against my cheek, the taste of him still lingering like smoke on my tongue. It should have frightened me, but instead it consumed me, a hunger I couldn't quiet no matter how hard I tried. I avoided him at first, thinking distance would weaken the pull. But Clay wasn't a man easily avoided. He appeared at the ranch, as always, offering to help Dad mend fences or haul feed. His presence as natural as the Texas sun. And yet every time our eyes met, there was something unspoken burning there. One evening, Dad drove into town for supplies, leaving me and Clay alone to stack hay bales in the barn. The silence between us throbbed, louder than the cicadas, outside. My shirt clung to my back with sweat, but it wasn't just the heat of labor that set my skin on fire. It was the awareness of him beside me, his arms flexing with each lift, the smell of leather and dust clinging to him. Finally, Clay set down the last bale and turned to me. His chest rose and fell with steady breaths, though his eyes betrayed the storm beneath. "We can't keep circling this, Jack," he said, voice low. "It's eating both of us alive." I swallowed hard, my pulse loud in my ears. "If Dad finds out—" "He won't." Clay cut in, his tone firm but not unkind. "Not if we're careful. But I can't stand here pretending I don't want you." The barn seemed to shrink around us. My throat tightened, torn between fear and longing. "It's wrong," I whispered, but the words sounded weak, flimsy against the fire roaring inside me. Clay stepped closer until the space between us was a thread waiting to snap. "Maybe," he admitted, "but I've wanted you since the moment you became a man. You think I didn't notice? The way you looked at me?" My breath hitched. Shame warred with desire, but desire won. Without another word, I reached for him. The kiss this time was not tentative. It was urgent, desperate, years of silence breaking loose all at once. His hands gripped my waist, pulling me against him with a force that made my knees buckle. I clung to him, terrified and exhilarated, the barn spinning around us. When he laid me back against the hay, the rough straw pricked my skin, grounding me in the reality of what we were doing. This wasn't a dream. Clay Maddox, my father's best friend, the man I'd watched from a distance all my life, was kissing me, touching me, claiming a part of me I hadn't known I was ready to give. Every movement was deliberate, measured, as if he wanted me to know that I had a choice. "Tell me to stop," he murmured against my throat. But I didn't. I couldn't. My silence was permission, my body answering him more honestly than words ever could. What followed was a blur of heat and need, each touch pushing me further from the boy I'd been, and closer to something dangerous, something thrilling. The barn filled with the sound of our breaths, our whispers, the quiet surrender of two men who knew they were breaking rules that could never be unbroken. When it was over, we lay tangled in the hay, the night pressing in through the slats of the barn walls. My chest rose and fell, still trying to catch up to the storm that had just passed. Clay's arm draped across me, protective, possessive. "You know this changes everything," he said quietly. I nodded, unable to speak. He was right. Nothing about my life, my father, or even myself would ever be the same. The crunch of tires on gravel shattered the stillness. My father's truck was pulling up the drive. Panic surged through me, but Clay's hands squeezed mine, steadying me. "Get dressed," he whispered, eyes sharp. "We'll play it cool." As I scrambled to fix my clothes, heart pounding, a thrill unlike anything I'd ever felt pulse through me. We'd crossed the line, and there was no turning back. And in that terrifying, exhilarating moment, I knew one thing with absolute certainty: I would do it again.